It is truly every single one of us doing our part that is going to make a difference. How I got involved was about 12 years ago. I was walking through an airport in Thessaloniki, Greece. I'm Greek. So if you've seen my Big Fat Greek Wedding, that is my Big Fat Greek life. And so it truly is like that. And so I was going to speak in Thessaloniki. I just had my second child. I was 40, and you know, when you're 40 and you pop out another kid, you're not thinking of starting a global anti-trafficking organisation. You are considering a vacation on Santorini. That's what I was thinking about. And so as I was standing there, I was waiting for my bags at the carousel. And you know, Greeks have always been very slow at work. That's why they bankrupted the planet in 2008. But they were particularly slow this day because there was a really good football game on. And if there's a football game on, they're not emptying the plane. So anyway, I'm waiting for my bags. I'm looking at all of these posters, and there are a disproportionate amount of posters of children, really young children and women. And because, of course, I read Greek, I could see it everywhere. It just said missing, 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 missing. And I've travelled the world for decades, literally speaking and teaching, and it was just odd to me that there were so many missing children. And especially in Thessaloniki, I'd never been up to the north of Greece. I'd been to Athens, Santorini often. And so I was just quite taken aback by the sheer number of children. I went on to find out my friend was running UNICEF in Copenhagen, so we came out and I called her almost immediately. And I said, Chanel, what is going on? Why is there so many missing children in Greece? And she went on to tell me that these were the alleged victims of human trafficking, which at that point, I didn't even know slavery still existed in the world today. I said, what do you mean? We've had the Emancipation Proclamation Act, we've had the Freedom from Slavery Act. I said, there is no way that slavery still exists in the world. And that's when I went on to find out that it is the fastest growing crime worldwide. Faster than the trafficking of armaments or drugs is the trafficking of human beings. And it was just unbelievable to me. And what had particularly grabbed my attention is when I was waiting for those bags, I was looking and there was a little girl, and she was about the same age as my little girl, and her name was Sophia. And my eldest daughter, Catherine, was 4 at the time. Sophia was just born. And so this little girl was Catherine's age, but she had Sophia's name. And as I was looking, I just stopped, and I saw this little girl called Sophia. And I started crying. That's what happened to me, because I was imagining what would this mother feel like. And you know, when you've just had a baby, you're hormonal anyway, and you're on hyper alert. And so I had all of those natural hormones going, but just even as a mother, I'm looking at that going, what would her mother be thinking? What would I be thinking if that was my child? And in that moment, I went from looking at someone else's missing child to seeing my own child. And the thing is, when you look, you can look away, but when you see, you can never unsee. And in that moment, I knew that I could never unsee this thing ever again. And so I didn't know what I could do. I knew I had a mouth, and I didn't know much else. I began to educate myself, and I wanted to learn about what difference could I make. I knew I couldn't do everything, but I also knew that I could never do nothing. And I think what happens to a lot of us is we are crippled and paralyzed by the enormity and the magnitude of the issue that we end up doing nothing instead of the one thing that every one of us could do. And if we all just did our one thing, we would together collectively do something so significant that would make such a difference in the world, that would be so profound. And so when we started at 21, it was always about the one. What is the one thing that you could do? What is the one thing that is going to help one survivor, one name, one person? And for me, there's only ever been 1 degree of separation between me and those survivors. I, at 33, in Australia, found out my brother received a letter from the government that told him that he was adopted. He was 35 at the time, I was 33. And I didn't, he called me, he was crying. And he said, Chris, I just got a letter, it says I've been adopted. And, I laughed at first, because when you're growing up, you never think you're related to your siblings. You always say your mother is from Mars, you're adopted, yes. But you know, when you find your brother calls you and says you really are adopted, I just thought you're kidding. And he said, no, you know, the government told me the name of my biological mother, my biological father, when I was born, when I was immunised, they have a whole file of my life. And he was just, you know, distraught. And he said, I'm going to go and see Mum. Now, my father had died when I was 19, and at this point my mum was 61. And I don't know if you know anything about Greeks, but they're so volatile. They act first and think later, and so I'm thinking my brother's going to go cray-cray. And so I get into the car and I drive down to my brother's house, to my mother's house. I walk in at the moment that my brother is giving my mother this piece of paper from the government, and my mum took it, her whole face changed, and she just started weeping. And she said, George, I'm so sorry, the adoption laws were so different in Australia. 35 years ago, they were all closed adoptions. We never thought you would find out. And the last thing I said to your father before he died was that I would never tell you. And I tore up all of the paperwork, I threw everything away. And you could all imagine, you know, it was one of those moments. My mother was crying, my brother was crying, the dog was crying, you know, it was like, it was a big fat Greek moment. So I didn't know what to do, and for a Greek girl, you know, food is the answer to life, the universe and everything, so I thought I'll come to the kitchen, make some baklava, and it will solve all of the world's problems. So I went to the kitchen, and about, you know, just a few minutes later, my mother came in and behind me, and she said, Christina, since we're telling the truth today, do you want to know the whole truth? And in that moment, you know, my mum, you know, I turned around and said to her, I've been adopted too. I had no idea. I was 33 years old, and my mum just started crying and said yes. And it was a bit of a game changer, because a little while after that I got sent my documents from the government. And you know how weird it is to get a birth certificate at 33 when you thought you had a birth certificate for 33 years. It's a strange moment when you find out you're not who you thought you were. I say all that to say, when I received the documents, I got a birth certificate, and in my birth certificate it simply says child's name, unnamed, number 2508 of 1966. And so if I was born not in Australia where there is a rule of law, where there is a proper adoption system, if I was not born in Sydney, Australia in 1966, if I was born in Romania or Albania or Bulgaria or Moldova or any of the countries that we're rescuing girls from and children from, and men for that matter, all around the world, I could easily be one of those children. I could have been one of the children placed in an orphanage that a trafficker comes and says, that's my niece, I'm going to come and take her, and you end up trafficked. And numbers are numbing, numbers are dehumanizing, numbers are desensitizing. It is so easy to ignore suffering when it's nameless and faceless. But the moment you put a name and a face to a number, it changes everything. So for me, it's never 40 million, because I was number 2508. And if I just said to you number 2508 of 1966 at Crown Street Women's Hospital in Sydney, Australia, it would mean nothing to you. But the minute you put a name and a face to it, and we say, tonight, that's me. That is me, number 2508 of 1966. So the degree of separation between me and any survivor is almost non-existent to me. They're never just a number, they're never just a statistic. We're not gathered here tonight just because we're trying to do something to make us feel good. We are going to do something that is literally going to transform lives. It's going to rescue people. It's going to help to establish justice around the world. So I say that by the fact that I love that about Dressember too, because what can be easier than putting on a tie and putting on a dress, even if Christine Caine can do that. But the fact is that everywhere, someone can do that. And what we need to do is not cripple and paralyze people by always presenting how enormous the problem is, but by giving people something tangible and simple to do to make people feel like they are truly making a difference. And when I started this from the outset, I said, I am not going to just cause people to cry and be overwhelmed by the enormity of the problem. I never want to ever speak where I haven't given someone something practically that they could do to make a difference. Because faith without works is dead. And we could sit here and try to be zealous, but the fact is, you know, I love Blythe, I just love the whole idea of put on a a dress, put on a tie, and you know what? Together we are going to raise awareness. And here's the deal, we are. You saw the Freedom Center in Bulgaria. We're getting ready together with Dressember, so that's why I expect you all to give really, really well. And we're going to go to South Africa and do the same thing. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of information. Of course, our goal at A21 is to reach, to rescue, and to restore. We have a very holistic approach to what we do. Who would have thought, standing at a carousel at Thessaloniki Airport 12 years ago now, we have 15 offices in 12 countries around the world, and literally are seeing survivors, women and children and men rescued almost every day. Like when I started, I said, you wait, one day we will be, I'll do it for one a year, and then I want one a month, and then I want one a week, and then I want one a day. We've got 40 million, so we could do one an hour and one a second. We could have people rescued all around the world. Why would that not happen? And so, I just want to tell you a little bit. It's hard for me to see it because my eyes are 53, so there you go. I'm the only woman in LA that says how old I really am. Okay, so gives you a bit of security in all of that. I can't even read this, but our freedom centers, I really can't, so this is why I'm talking, because it's like I looked at that and went, that's awesome, I didn't bring my glasses, and it's black. I'm in LA where you all want to look cool, but it doesn't help the speaker speak, so that's just fantastic. At our freedom centres, you could go to any one of our freedom centres around the world and just see, a young woman from Nigeria learning to read, and then another young woman from Albania learning to write, and someone else getting job skills, and someone else. We have a very holistic approach in terms of healthcare. We work with governments and law enforcements all throughout the world, literally, and are just seeing unbelievable things happen. And I'll tell you one story. I could tell you, Nick, before I walked out, I was behind that room, and then all the beautiful models came in, so I left. And but it's like there's another rescue today from Spain. I could tell you nearly every day we have another rescue, and then another rescue, and then another rescue. And but I'll tell you the one that keeps me going, and here is the bottom line. It does keep me going right from the beginning. Is I was in Thessaloniki, Greece, and there was girls there from 14 countries. And it's a little bit like the UN, and because you just, these girls are speaking all different languages, you need to have translators. And one girl was telling me she had been trafficked from North Africa, and she was explaining this situation to me, and here is the truth. If I wasn't sitting there, I'm not even convinced that I would believe it myself. But she was telling me how her and 60 of her friends were put in a shipping container in North Africa and brought across into Istanbul. They had been promised a job in Greece. So when they got to the docks, the trafficker, who they didn't know was a trafficker at the time, they thought it was just someone, an agent that had got them a job in another country. And they at first were a little bit surprised and said, we were supposed to get onto a ship and go, and they said, yes, but there's been some problems. The only way we can get you there now is through this container that's been fitted out. You'll be comfortable. And these girls were from villages in Africa that you confronted in that moment with a choice. Are you going to trust this person and just, or are you going to go back and, into abject poverty when this has been your one chance out, and you're going to be able to send money back to your family? You've been sold a lie, you've been told a story, but you don't know that. So of course, you're just going to believe what this person tells you. They get onto the container, and the oxygen filtration system in the container broke on the way to Istanbul. So when they opened the container in Istanbul, 30 of the 60 girls had suffocated to death, and this girl's best friend was one of those 30. And when she was telling me that story, just in a total mess, I mean, it was just horrific for her. And then this next part is what happens so frequently. What happened was they took the girls, the remaining 30 girls, they put them in apartments very close to the docks there in Istanbul. The men were dressed in law enforcement uniforms, which is what they do, to make them think that they're the police, so that in that way the girls will never go to try to get any help or to try to escape, because if you think that law enforcement is in on this, where are you going to go for help? And so they were raped 15, 20 times a day, consistently given very little food, almost no water, and the whole object obviously is to break them down. Now you've got to understand, they've got no paper, they don't know what country they're in, they've got no passports, they don't have the language, they don't know where they are and what's going on. So the sheer trauma of what has just occurred to those girls, then they put those girls in those rubber boats. Do you remember when the Syrian refugee crisis happened, and those boats that were going over to Greece? So you can get that picture of those kind of boats. As they were coming over, the Greek Coast Guard was coming through that part of the Aegean, and so that the traffickers would not get caught with the girls, they threw them overboard into the Aegean. Now you've got to understand, these girls were from villages in Africa where you would walk 5 days to just get water in a well, so they would never have even seen this kind of ocean. And what happened was, of course, 25 of those girls drowned. And when the Greek police did a raid on the brothel in Athens, where the remaining 5 girls were taken, that's how they ended up in our centre in Thessaloniki. And I was in just sheer shock as this girl's relaying this story, as you could imagine. And next to her was a young girl from Russia, and she's speaking very broken Greek. Greek is my first language, so she was speaking to me in Greek, and she was asking me why I came. And I began to tell her a little bit of my story. And, you know, I came from a background myself, so not only was I, you know, left in a hospital, unnamed and unwanted and abandoned at birth, and just understood some of the pain of, you know, being in a foreign nation. I grew up the daughter of Greek immigrants, pre-multicultural Australia when it was not cool, and I myself experienced sexual abuse for 12 years at the hands of 4 men, men that my mother and father trusted and should have trusted, but violated that trust. And where most abuse happens, obviously, is in the safety of your own home by people that know you very well and have got access to you. So I was explaining to her about some of my own story, again, so different to theirs, but understanding some of the pain that comes with the trauma of abuse and just being violated. And as I was telling her my story and why I wanted to help, this girl was just such a mess, and I'll never forget, she yelled at me because, you know, in those first couple of days, this girl was just rescued. They don't know whether you are a trafficker and you've just brought them into a safe house to traffic them back out to another country. So it takes them quite a while to build up the trust to you. And she just sort of, across the thing, was listening to my story and I think wanting to believe my compassion, but just couldn't quite work it out. She goes, if this is all true, if this is true, what you're saying to me, then why didn't you come sooner? And there was just that phrase of, why didn't you come sooner? So here I am 12 years later, and why am I here in LA with a dress on a Thursday night? Because that phrase is the thing that still keeps me going with as much passion. Because the truth is, when we sit here and we're here in the middle of LA going, you know, really what is more important than saving people that are locked up in captivity right now, that are being bought and sold for sex or forced labor around the world? What is more important than helping to rescue human beings, helping to give people dignity, helping to restore people back to you know, how they were created to be? Essentially, everyone deserves the right to freedom. Everyone deserves the right to have a life outside of being just in bondage and enslaved. And the fact is, we can make a difference. We can make a difference. And when she said, why didn't you come sooner? I don't know if you remember the movie Schindler's List. Do you remember when they were trying to give him that award and he didn't want to take that award, and he's going, you know, that car could have been 10 more people. That ring could have... I tell you, that's what it's like for me every single time to this day. It's like, you know, one day I don't want to stand there and go, you know what, I was just too busy, or I was just too preoccupied. But I said to her that day, I said, look, I can't think of one good reason right now why I didn't come sooner. I said, but I promise you this now that I know. I said, I promise you that wherever I go, for as long as I am alive, I will tell people you exist, and we will do whatever it takes to come and find you and come and get you and come and rescue you. And now 12 countries around the world. We're about to open a child advocacy centre in Cambodia. Because you're all going to give so generously, we're going to open another fantastic freedom centre in South Africa, and we are going to see people rescued and restored. And how about we just make a decision that on our watch, watch, we're going to reverse the statistics. The fact is, when I started A21, it was the fastest growing crime worldwide. How about on our watch we reverse that and say, not on our watch. We will not have the buying and selling of human beings as the #1 crime worldwide. We are going to change that, and we're going to see people set free. So, Blythe, I don't know where you are. Are you here somewhere? Where are we? She's coming? From the back. Were you one of the models? Girl, you have just been gold. Your great courage. All of us at A21, we love you. We thank God for you. Isn't she absolutely stunning?